What's up everyone, welcome to HiFi Turtle. We talk about everything audiophile. Today I'm going to introduce you to my new reference turntable. This is the Marantz TT-15S1. It is an $1,800 belt drive turntable. Although it carries the Marantz name, the OEM is Clear Audio. Clear Audio being very well known in the turntable world, making a lot of OEM turntables also for Macintosh and other brands, as well as their own line, including their flagship Statement, which comes in at around $300,000. This turntable came out in 2008, so it's a little bit over 15 years old now, but it's still a current production model in the Marantz lineup. At its core, it is essentially a Clear Audio Emotion, although with some upgrades and some visual differences that were made by Marantz. Marantz markets this turntable as an entry-level audiophile turntable that can really get you everything that you need to get the best out of your records while not spending a ton of money. They offer it as a value proposition when you consider things like the Clear Audio Satisfy Black tone arm that comes with it is around $1,400 on its own. The Virtuoso cartridge is the V1 Virtuoso, by the way, not the V2 that is currently out, was $750 when it debuted in the early 2000s. So when you factor that in, it seems like you're buying a cartridge and a tone arm and getting some sort of discount for buying both of those, and then getting the turntable for free, essentially. Like I said, this is a belt drive turntable. The motor is decoupled from the base itself. There is a small gap between the motor housing and the plinth of the table to ensure that no vibrations from the motor can make it to the platter and ultimately onto your records. The Satisfy Black is an aluminum tone arm, a little bit over 9 inches in length. It has a gimbal bearing that Clear Audio says uses sapphire crystals, the same you'd find in a fine Swiss watch. The anti-skate is a magnetic mechanism that is controlled by turning the screw on the side in or out, and then the cables are built into the tone arm, so you're not going to be able to change the cables out on that, get a longer length cable without using some sort of extension adapter. There are two ground cables. There's the cable that comes out of the tone arm, and then also another ground cable that comes out of the aluminum bearing from the subplatter. The cartridge is the Virtuoso V1. This is a moving magnet cartridge that was made by Clear Audio in the early 2000s, discontinued sometime in the 2010s, and now replaced by the Virtuoso V2. I've seen some people say that you get a $1,200 cartridge with this turntable, but I think that that's misleading because the V2, while it is $1,200, this is the V1, so a completely different cartridge. And being that it debuted at $750 back in the early 2000s, adjusting for inflation is actually worth quite a bit, but this is a discontinued model no longer offered by Clear Audio on its own, so factor in whatever kind of price reduction or decrease that you want to figure out from that. The setup of this table is very simple, and Marantz includes instructions. It can be set up on the VTA side with either the included felt mat or just the acrylic plinth. Mine is set up to use the felt mat, although on thicker records like 180 grams, if they're even slightly warped, you will find that when queuing up the tone arm, that the record and the needle can come into contact with each other. So I'm actually using the thinner felt mat that came with my collector's edition of the Undertale soundtrack, which is a little bit thinner felt mat, in order to avoid that problem on those thicker records. Which is one of the quirks that it seems with the tone arm itself. The queuing is very close to the record from the needle. There's not a lot of lift that the cue arm gives, so just you got to be careful and keep that in mind. Another quirk that seems universal to Clear Audio turntables is the fact that they believe the center hole of a record should be exactly 7.3 millimeters. So the spindle on this turntable is exactly that, or exactly meant to fit that. I found that a lot of records in my case are slightly smaller, so I have to push down on the record to get it onto the plinth with a good amount of force. It actually kind of clamps it down on its own, so you don't even have to use the included clever clamp with that. But getting them off is a whole nother story, so I have to do this little dance where I kind of shimmy the record back and forth, and keep shimmying it until I can get it off. So that's a little quirky. Clear Audio sells a separate hole boring device that will bore the correct diameter hole for your records, but I'm more afraid of accidentally boring it and it gets off center and then the record just sounds really bad. So I'd rather just kind of stretch the record holes over time of playing versus trying to manipulate or manhandle my records in that way. Like I said before, this is a decoupled motor, so there is a hole that is ever so slightly larger than the motor housing itself. You're supposed to move the motor housing so it does not come into contact with the actual table plinth, although this can be a little bit of a hassle because since the power button is on the motor itself, just pushing that on and off over time can ever so slightly move the motor housing to come in contact eventually with the plinth. So I would say it's worth it to check every so often to ensure that the motor is still totally decoupled from the table and that it hasn't accidentally been drifting and now is making contact with your table, sending those vibrations into the table itself. It is a little finicky, and it seems like this problem could have been entirely avoided by making the diameter of the hole even like half a centimeter larger than it is, but it seems like Clear Audio is very stubborn on the size of their holes, as we've seen with the spindle and the size of the record holes themselves. The belt drive is self-regulating and seems like it does a good job. I used a RPM measurer on my phone and I got pretty much perfect 45 and 33 1/3 each time. There is no switch to go between 33 1/3 and 45. Instead, you have to actually pull the belt and move it up for a 45 or down for 33 1/3, which gives you the silicone belt, which has this rounded shape instead of a flat shape. I kind of wish that there was a design change here or incorporated in the motor in a way that it could just be a flat belt, because in making that switch, you have to be very careful. The belt can slip off, especially coming down to 33 1/3, and then you got to reattach it, and it just kind of slides around the plinth because it is a rounded belt instead of a flat belt. The one thing I don't like about this turntable is that it doesn't come with a dust cover, and I know a lot of high-end turntables don't come with dust covers, and that's just something that always irks me. Again, I feel like it's weird to pay more to get less. But there are a lot of third-party dust covers out there if you want to get one. While there are really nice museum quality acrylic covers that will run you $200, $300 or more, I could not bring myself to pay that much for a dust cover. So I ended up getting a $30 one that I found on eBay. It's kind of like a rain jacket. It's just this thin vinyl cover. It is clear, but it's not something that you could leave on the table while you're playing your records because it's going to fall onto the tone arm. It's going to fall onto the record. So it does a good job just protecting my player while it's not in use. It's not museum quality or anything like that, but again, I would rather have this cheap raincoat cover than be caught paying $200, $300 for a plastic cover for this turntable. The primary competition to this turntable is probably going to be the Rega P3 Anniversary Edition, which has an external power supply, has a speed regulator externally as well, has this really nice walnut veneer on it. Also comes with a moving magnet cartridge that Rega says is worth a lot of money. I didn't evaluate the P3. I considered the P3, but I ended up going with the TT-15 for pretty much two reasons. One, because you can make it glow like that, and I think that's really cool. And again, in vinyl, coolness is measurable. Second, again, while this is a Marantz branded turntable, Clear Audio is the OEM, and I've heard a lot of Clear Audio turntables. I've really enjoyed my experience each time with Clear Audio turntables, so I trusted that my experience here would be the same, and I wanted to shell out $2,500+ to get the entry-level concept. Now on the premise of value, again, like I said at the beginning, it comes with the Satisfy Black tone arm, $1,400 on its own, the Virtuoso V1, formerly $750 on its own, and then it just seems like you get the table itself for essentially free. The value proposition there just seems odd to me because I feel like Clear Audio certainly does know this and probably prices those things in order to get you to buy a full-on table like this, or the same with their concept, which comes with the Satisfy Carbon, which is around $2,000 on its own. So I'm sure they market the exact same way. You get the Carbon Satisfy, you get the cartridge, and altogether you get the table for essentially free. Anyone looking to change the tone arm from their turntable is not doing that for a $1,500, $2,000 turntable. They're doing that for a $5,000, $10,000+ turntable. And again, I feel like people would not choose to put a $1,400 arm on their $10,000 turntable. It just doesn't make sense. So I have to think that probably 99% of the satisfy tone arms that are made by Clear Audio end up either on a Marantz TT-15, a Macintosh variant, or their concept model, and not being sold individually. But the idea that those turntables come with this $1,400 tone arm puts it in the consumer's mind that they're getting an incredible value. And on the cartridge side, while this is a $750 model that is now discontinued and has been for, I think, at least 10 years, I don't have a way of confirming this, but I've seen some posts on some forums that are saying that these earlier Clear Audio moving magnet cartridges were OEM from Audio-Technica. Specifically, that the Virtuoso V1 is a modification of the AT95E, a $50 cartridge made by Audio-Technica with some modifications, and certainly the Virtuoso on the spec sheet does look a lot better than the stock 95E. I don't think that it cost Audio-Technica $500 or even $100 to make that modification. So in Clear Audio's rebranding of this cartridge, yeah, they can charge $750, but how many of those cartridges did they actually sell? Almost seems like it is also kind of made up or put there in order to make you feel like you're getting this grand value for this table. Or I bet back in the day, if you did buy one of the more expensive Clear Audio tables, you could get that Virtuoso or one of their other upper level moving magnets at a significant discount when you bought a table. And Clear Audio themselves in a very recent video said that in 15 years of making their entry-level concept model, they've only sold 20,000 units of that. For most companies, that is very, very low. I'm sure Audio-Technica sells multitudes more turntables than that in a year, maybe even 6 months versus Clear Audio, and that's their best seller. So for Marantz or Macintosh or anyone else who gets OEMs from Clear Audio, I'm sure Marantz is also ordering the TT-15s in quantities that equal multiple years of sales for Clear Audio. So it just makes sense that they can offer a significant discount to Marantz or Macintosh to build these turntables, and yeah, of course they come out looking like a better value proposition, especially with those bigger companies having their own distribution channels. And I'm not trying to talk down Clear Audio or Marantz or Macintosh or anything like that. I really like this turntable. I think it sounds great. I'm happy with the price that I paid for it, and I'm happy with the results of the turntable. But to say that it's like this unbelievable value and you're somehow like pulling the wool over Clear Audio or Marantz's eyes in getting this turntable for $1,800, yeah, they cost that way for a reason. Believe me, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and if Marantz couldn't get, you know, a Satisfy Black and a Virtuoso V1 for a lot less than $2,100, yeah, they wouldn't be selling this turntable. And believe me, they're making good margins on this thing. So let's get to the sound of the turntable. This thing is really holographic, has great imaging, has not the most romantic or syrupy sound that may be associated sometimes with vinyl playback. It seems very neutral, very articulate, and one of the quietest turntables that I have ever listened to. I've seen some people say that it is bass light. I don't feel that way. I think that the bass is punchy, that it is not super deep in the digging of that bass, but I definitely would not describe it as lean or thin sounding. I think people that are used to turntables in this price category, a lot of these turntables end up kind of exaggerating bass to make it seem like you're getting this fuller, thicker sound. And then they switch to a turntable like this that is more neutral, more resolving, and they just think all the bass has disappeared. Originally, I had this going into the Skit Manny, which was still very good, but I knew it could take it up another notch. And when I got the Skit Skull, that's where I really felt that vinyl playback start to reach into a higher tier of resolution. So again, with the Skull that has a very black background and the TT-15, which also has a very black background, it comes out almost like a digital playback where, yes, of course there is hiss, pops, and clicks, but they're very muted on this combination, I feel like. So at times, if you close your eyes, I would venture to say it kind of would be hard to tell if it was a, you know, sterile, clean digital version versus the vinyl. And I don't want to say that, oh, it's sterile or it sounds, you know, not romantic or whatever, because I know that that's very important for a lot of people in vinyl, but I like this high resolution, articulate, very neutral, very detailed sound over the more glossed over, syrupy sounding, romantic, laid back sound that you could associate with typical vinyl playback. I really love the way that it fleshed out the details on the saxophone in Dire Straits' Your Latest Trick. I honestly think that I prefer the analog version of that track to the digital version. The saxophone on there is just so rich, so detailed, has a lot of depth. It's a really fun track to listen to with this turntable. Going to a more modern and maybe poorly recorded album like Bring Me the Horizon's post-human survival horror, it seems like that album was mastered in a way that kind of sucks out a little bit of the synthetic bass that they do, because there's a lot of synths, and more so goes for this 3D holographic image of all these vocals and the guitars. It does a really good job of this, but again, it misses the sub-bass elements that come out of those synths, but the bass itself is still tight and still satisfying. There are a lot of synths, bass triggers, and things of that nature going on in a lot of these tracks. So while that's not ultimately totally conveyed over the format or with this turntable, I still feel like it's satisfying enough where you don't feel like you're missing out. And then heading over to a album with a ton of dynamics like Groza's The Redemptive End, there are just so many passages in that album. We go from blast beats, black metal, to nuanced post-rock harmonies, and some really light vocals in between the screaming and the growling. There's just so much going on in that album, and I definitely think that the TT-15 conveys that in a very eloquent and beautiful way that makes you feel like you're getting a closer experience to maybe a truer version of that album versus just the more clean digital version. Again, this very rich black metal kind of history has some lifestyle elements to it in addition to the musical elements, and I think that comes out really beautifully on the TT-15. I think that's going to do it for me. Again, this is my new reference turntable, and I think I've spun more vinyl in the last month and a half of having this thing than I did with my old turntable having that for a tad over 6 months. Again, this is a turntable that is now over 15 years old, but the design itself has stood the test of time. I still think it looks really good, really cool. It's a conversation piece for sure. You can put the LED underneath it and make it glow like I have here. That's really fun as well. A big shout out to Schroeder HiFi, Tim Schroeder. He set this thing up for me, so big shout out to Tim, always a friend of the channel and really helpful in all his great knowledge and all his great setup tools as well to set this thing up better than I could ever hope to. So that's the video. Make sure you hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Check the links below in the description for other ways to help support the channel. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.